Welcome to AI, Government and the Future, a podcast by Corner Alliance. We explore the intersection of artificial intelligence, government and the future. We work with government to create results. We ignite your agency's mission by helping you to design and implement high-impact and innovative federal programs in AI, broadband, cybersecurity, public safety, and more. Being a government ally is at the core of all we do.
Welcome to a special edition of AI Government in the Future, where we are taking a look back at some of the most insightful and thought-provoking discussions we've had with our expert guests on the transformative potential of artificial intelligence. In this episode, we've compiled highlights from 5 of our previous guests, each offering unique perspectives on how AI is revolutionizing various industries and sectors. As we listen back to these excerpts, you'll gain a comprehensive understanding of the AI landscape, from the way we interact with technology to the implications for governance and the future of work. Our guests will share their insights on the opportunities and challenges presented by AI and how we can navigate this rapidly growing field. So sit back, relax, and join us on this journey through the best of our AI discussions. First up, we have Arnold Kling, who discusses how large language models, or LLMs, are changing the way we communicate with computers, making it more intuitive and natural than ever before.
In some ways, there were predictions made in the past that AI has actually fulfilled, right? So I think of it as, I think we talked about that interactive journey through information on, using the World Wide Web. In a way, the large language model might actually be the thing that enables that. The technology wasn't there to meet the vision, really. So, and then today I thought really interesting. So you talked about what you think is now the superpower of LLMs, which I think is a slightly different point than we've talked about before.
Right. That's something I didn't have 8 or 9 months ago. And that idea is that, up until now, if you wanted to use a computer, you had to talk the computer's language. You had to translate your goals into, back in the day, Fortran, now it would be Java or whatever. And these things really allow you to communicate in English. I was on a bus several months ago. This is shortly after these things came out, and it was next to a professional computer programmer, and he was working on an app for himself the way professional computer programmers do. And he was stuck with something. So he just asked ChatGPT how to fix it. And it said, do this. And so he did that. And he said, well, it didn't work exactly the way I wanted. It did this, and I want this. He got the answer. Well, that used to be, I guess there were things like GitHub and so on, where there were these libraries that a programmer could look at that to ask each other questions. Those things are dying out because you can now do that. And there are just all these instances of people who used to spend a lot of time doing coding, now letting ChatGPT or Copilot or Microsoft Copilot or something do that. That's just a real change. But what's more interesting, I think, is the ability to do that, with things like draw me an image like this, and I think pretty soon it will be make a movie like this, or bring this, create a character like this. And then I think that this is something that's controversial. There are people arguing both sides, but I think the most interesting thing is to be able to talk to a physical machine like a robot and be able to talk to it in English. So instead of having to write a code to get a robot to do something, you get to a point where you can talk to it. And if that pans out, that is, and there's some people who think that'll pan out within the next few years, that will just really, really change robotics. Robotics will just be a big part of people's lives if it gets to the point where you can just talk to it in plain language and not have to write code.
I mean, I think some people may have gotten ahead of this prediction, but it does strike me that most software gets abstracted at this point, that you don't really need software. You just create it on the fly out of whatever data you want. We're not there yet, but It does strike me that most SaaS software models seem kind of endangered at this point.
I just saw something where there's a huge amount of banking software that's still in COBOL. And it sat there and sat there and sat there while the number of COBOL programmers went down like this. And so, but now you can direct one of these large language models, put that into Java so that people will understand it and will work better. I mean, if you'd had something like that several years ago, the Obamacare website would never have crashed. Because I'm pretty sure it crashed because there was an attempt to layer contemporary software on some really old systems at the IRS and other places.
Of course. So you transitioned us right into the key topic of this podcast, which is how AI is going to impact government. So we've looked at it from a couple of standpoints. I want to talk about both. But so from a not a regulatory standpoint, from a technological standpoint, what do you see AI doing that either challenges the government and its ability to deliver, or will be a huge enabler? And maybe those are the same thing.
Well, what I just talked about could be an enabler because there's a lot of very, very old software that, because it works, everyone's afraid to touch it, but it means it can't be improved. So that possibility is there. Every large organization struggles with customer support, and those customer support calls are so frustrating. The menu systems, if you want to do this, do what. So I think the ability to make those more human and more responsive and obviously a lot cheaper is a huge and almost immediately doable. So the IRS being currently sort of overwhelmed. I mean, I can't imagine if you call the IRS, you can get an answer within any reasonable time. That could really change and change pretty rapidly. I would think that would be like a 3 to 6 month project.
I think it's a weekend project. I mean, I was working with a guy who was it was on the help desk as a programmer, helping build software for SAM.gov on the government side. And ChatGPT came out. This is 3.5. And over the weekend, he took all the help desk articles that they have out for SAM, and their backlog of customer support requests is months long, right? And just put them into like a vector database and started a rudimentary chatbot with it. And it was incredible. I mean, I literally typed in on the web, on their interface, do I need to get a cage code? And it gave me 10 articles that didn't directly address that issue. They were about cage codes, but they didn't tell me whether I needed. And I typed it into the chatbot, and it said, you only need a cage code if you meet one of these 3 conditions. I was like, wow, that was a weekend. That probably saves 80% of their customer support requests. So it sounds like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. Then I started trying to think through some guests we've talked about, like, how is AI going to help in policy and rulemaking going forward? So some of the ideas that have come out is, can we create avatars or large language models for particular interest groups? And so then we can have them debate things, right? Can we get, in a rulemaking, can we get to 98% in 10 minutes because we know what everybody's going to say? And then we can be efficient with the last. Where do your mind go on these kind of like big governmental functions that impact our lives every day?
I guess I haven't put a whole lot of bandwidth into that. So I'd have to kind of do that on the spot. I think one of the challenges with these chatbots is this deep fake phenomenon or multivariate spam. So I think if they stick, for example, with their old procedures of having comments, you could easily get spammed in your comments. I think in general, there's probably going to be a lot of Red Queen kind of games where people are going to try to game the government system, and the government's going to have to be a lot more agile than it usually is in being able to anticipate and fight off the gaming.
I mean, you think about the lawsuits, comments. You could even have an instance where, if AI discovers 1 million cures to diseases, what happens to the FDA at that point? It strikes me that for good and bad, the government is going to there's going to be this forcing function of the amount of stuff coming in. It's going to force them to adopt this technology because it seems the only answer is more AI, right? On the other side.
Yeah, and they're going to have to take advantage of the opportunities to be able to have much richer, quicker reaction times in conversations with the public would be the big opportunity.
Next, we're joined by Alex Wirth, who emphasizes the urgent need for government agencies to prepare for the coming wave of AI-generated policy pitches and stakeholder inputs.
So let's think about that. If you're at OMB, at Office of Regulatory Affairs or something, and what should these people, or your congressional office, like, what do you think these people should be doing to make sure that they're sorting the signals from the noise or the false signals?
So one is increasing the awareness about what AI can do with your entire staff and team. Because I'm sure those that are listening to our podcast and are probably the early adopters and the technology enthusiasts, because they go, podcast on government and AI, I want to listen to it. And that's awesome. Keep doing that. But you need to be aware that there's a whole series of other people within your organization or office who probably don't fully get what AI is, don't get what it's going to impact the job, and may end up seeing and being like, oh, wow, this is, really persuasive and this is changing. So that's one, increase awareness. The second is to actually have a strategy and say, all right, well, if this is going to come true and we're going to have many more personalized pitches and people reaching out, how are we going to respond to that as OMB or as a regulatory agency or as an office? And what does that mean for us? And as we think about like kicking off the new year and thinking about the year ahead, I think that is a very relevant topic that I would encourage folks to have the conversation. And the reality is it'll be a little bit different for each individual involved, but that's the big change that's going to be coming.
So are you saying I should go raise money to create a tool to help them deal with all the platforms coming at them? Sounds like maybe that's a little Christmas gift.
A little Christmas gift for you, and there's a business idea. But I also think on that note is also worth this audience knowing. We are seeing the biggest technology transformation since the invention of the internet with AI, where there is a whole new wave of innovation that is coming, of people doing exactly that, of saying, I can plug into the ChatGPT API, or I can come in and plug into this large language model and be able to do this. And there's going to be many more tools out there beyond even the ones that you or I could sit on this podcast and think about. And that is just the importance that blockchain might have been a little more of a fad of like, oh, it's Web3 and people are excited, but people didn't see fully of what's the impact at the end of the day. This, we are all seeing and living the impact, and it's going to be significant. And we're in the early innings of it.
And I think one of the key messages I've been trying to get across doing this is, look, we all know government has difficulty with procurement. It's slow, it has a lot of conflicting priorities. But if they just sit still, there's a tsunami coming that will pretty much overwhelm them. And the current structures I see working, we work with the bureaucracy every day, cannot handle what's going to come at them. And I think it's months away, not multiple years away.
Well, I think the other side of it is, there's both, hey, here's what's coming, but then there's also, what are you missing out on? And this goes to my second bucket of things, and even third bucket, that AI is going to come make it much more easier for us to do a whole series of parts of our job that are usually the most arduous and tedious tasks in our day. And to those people out there that are doing things that you go, oh, I think a computer could do this, or someone could come in and summarize this or put this together, that technology is being developed and worked on. And the broader goal that both Quorum has and others have, thinking of the application of AI, how do we spend time on the things that are more meaningful, the strategy, the policy, the relationships, the engagement that people have? Because that should be the core of where we are spending time, either as government officials or as elected officials and engaging, or as third-party advocates, because that's where the things really get done. And that's where I think it's essential that government leans in on the earlier side to looking at adopting and bringing it into their own work to capture all those benefits that other organizations outside of government are going to be capturing.
Our third guest is Nathan Manzotti, Director of Data Analytics and AI Centers of Excellence at the GSA. He shares his perspective on the federal government's adoption of generative AI and its potential to unlock vast reserves of unstructured data.
So I guess what I would see is sort of like this generative AI. My take would be it's speeding up, but it's not like a day-to-day thing baked into federal operations at this point. Would you agree with that? And that's sort of like, that's what's coming next. Because you see it, it's almost going to get forced in a way where that's getting embedded into productivity software with the Office suite. And you guys use Gmail or the Google suite, and it'll be in there as well. So it feels like next year is going to be the year it kind of comes into everyday operation. So the rubber's really going to hit the road.
That's an interesting question because I agree. So this year, everybody's trying to figure out what to do to create some constraints around how to use it and to make sure that people don't put sensitive information in there. There is going to be sensitive information that's in a walled off controlled environment with all the security controls. That is all being figured out now. And I agree with you. Next year is when like the full production versions, integration into everything is probably going to really kick off heavy. And said, everybody's using it. It's powerful. And so you can get so much done, especially in the right hands. Somebody like me, if I'm working on something like developing some guidance for benchmarks for AI testing and quality control, of course, I'm going to use generative AI to flesh out my answers. And then I research those, right? But knowing how to use it, I say, okay, I can't just take this blanket response from the AI. I have to verify it and all that, but it's just an accelerant to progress. So whether, in my opinion, what I think is going on is if agencies are blocking it, probably people are still using it. So that's one of the reasons why I'm excited that we have an opportunity to contribute to training the whole federal government in AI, because I think that training on multiple different levels is very necessary right now, including like training on kind of like cybersecurity awareness training. Do this with AI, don't do this. Like baseline understanding of the risks and how to use it. And then in addition to that, also more role specific training, like someone who's an acquisition professional. Well, how can they use it? What should they be aware of?
But even just that use case, or going back to OMB, rulemaking comments, they go through these comment periods. And it strikes me that I'm hearing from other business owners, maybe even outside of the government, they're quoting doing a proposal for work went from 6 weeks to 6 hours with generative AI. So you can imagine your colleagues in FAS getting deluged with, or they're the people they're doing acquisition for, getting deluged with contract proposals, or on the comments side, getting deluged with comments on a rulemaking. And so it really strikes me that federal government has no choice but to deploy AI to deal with that AI. And so the forcing function is coming. And no one can really bury their head in the sand and avoid it.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to see a period of cat and mouse, right?
Yeah, of course. Let you guess which one is going to stay ahead. So I think the private sector is going to be ahead, and it's going to force government to play catch up on it, because I think government's just not going to be as agile in deploying solutions.
And one thing that I think about a lot, and I talk about this too, and it's an emerging area of research and product development, in the private sector. I think there's a lot of power in using generative AI to structure unstructured data. What I mean by that is you take something like ChatGPT equivalent through an API and give it a context that says, hey, look at this humongous trove of PDFs, and then extract all the objects into this schema. And if you know what a JSON object is, put it in a JSON object, extract all the people from this, and take the page number, their name, the contextual information, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you do a bunch of iterations on that. And now all of a sudden you have a database that you can analyze. And doing that, and then also testing to make sure that that model actually did. So running it through a couple different iterations that are slightly different to get the same information allows you to evaluate how good that model is at extracting that information correctly from the PDFs. Not only do you get the structured database that now you can do analytics on more traditionally, as more easy to verify and things like that. You're not just going to the AI for everything, but you can also test and make sure that it's accurate.
You're kind of hitting on what I think is probably the most profound thing the government's going to do beyond regulation. I mean, the treasure trove of data within government is immense. There are billions of treasures in the attic here. And so you look at open data and all that stuff. Now that you can do it with these tools like you're talking about, and those are getting better, this is a national asset that could grow our economy at huge. It's really going to be pretty transformative.
It kind of seems like what generative AI is making possible is kind of what the promise of big data was back in 2012, 2013. Now it's going to be realized, because back then, it's just there was advances in parallelized compute. You had the Hadoop and stuff that came along. But still, to analyze that data, it was technically complex and sometimes cost prohibitive, right?
And a ton of it was just unstructured, right? So it was very difficult.
Now we have Jesse Anglen, who explores the immense potential of AI to uplift humanity while acknowledging the existential risks it poses if not carefully managed.
I think that AI has a vast potential to make humanity better. Kind of the motto I've had for the majority of my life now is I aim to try to upgrade the user experience of humanity. The reason I am as interested in AI as I am, and blockchain and AR, VR and IoT and some of the like cutting edge tech that is coming to fruition right now is because I see them as having vast potential to upgrade the user experience of humanity. But it's kind of like nuclear fusion that has, of its time, that technology actually really has improved the world a great deal with nuclear power and some of the other things that we've been able to do with it. It's also caused more heartache and fear, destruction than anything else. And I don't see why AI would be any different than that. I do think we need to figure out what to do with it. Like as a human species, like the Pandora's box is open and it's crawling out and no one's stuffing it back in. Like we now are on a timeline to figure this stuff out.
I worry that analogy would be too apt and that, nuclear power is such a blessing and we've actually made it very difficult to use the blessing, right? And we're actually moving away from our fear. So the hope is we don't lose the benefits of AI just out of the fear.
So I put a lot of thought into this. So people are developing these models that can just run, right? Like ChatGPT, or I think a better analogy would be like Llama, or maybe like the Falcon 40 billion parameter model or something like that. These are models that are pre-trained that can just run, right? They exist. You don't have to train them. You don't have to do anything with them. You can just use them. They're kind of like a built piece of software. I think that what ends up happening is that, I don't know, it's too accessible to just regulate like we do nuclear power. It's pretty hard to go dig up a big pile of uranium and, there's these rare resources and all that stuff. Not super hard to go buy yourself a couple A100s and run Llama 2, and then you have access to it. So it's a much more difficult technology to regulate than something like nuclear power, which is why I think we need to figure out how to deal with it, because we have to.
So I was curious, going back to sort of this chemistry to math, do you think there's what are the limitations to that, right? Like I see driving, talked about thinking, but has this become biological at some point? And have you thought about that or what it would require?
No, actually, I was reading a paper the other day. It was basically, the entire paper was about the limitations of AI. And right now, AI is not limited by the kinds of problems or how difficult of problems it can solve. It's limited by how big, because as you train models, they grow exponentially in their need to consume CPU cycles, right? To refine the neural network and actually find those weights and biases that produce the correct token outputs. And basically, there just isn't enough, in theory, it can do anything. It could be infinitely intelligent. And it could solve any problems that you want it to solve. There just isn't enough compute power, universally to be able to get a model to do that. And so I think what's going to happen is, as the technology becomes more valuable, we're going to build better and better models to the extent that the hardware can actually produce them globally. Hardware is going to become something that begins to innovate because we need to in order to produce better models. And so you'll see this kind of back and forth. But I think it'll follow Moore's law. And I think there's enough proof of concept problem solving that I've seen to make me believe that if something is theoretically possible, it can come up with a solution to it. And so, what do you get if you can build a machine that is smarter than the person that it required to build the machine? And then you can ask that machine to build a machine. Can that machine build a machine smarter than itself? It probably can. And if that machine can build a machine smarter than itself, you go through a few iterations of that cycle, and then pretty soon you're using AI to improve on itself, right? Which is, if you read sci-fi books, there's a huge warning against this, never let an AI improve on itself. Well, we will, because we're greedy and we want, the biggest and best and the most money coming in, the most power. And so we'll kind of continue down that road until it gets too scary for us, probably.
Finally, we hear from Julian Jacobs, who discusses the need for government investment in healthcare and biotechnology industries to boost productivity and create world-leading industry in the age of AI.
First of all, number one, I guess we haven't seen massive job dislocation as a result of AI technology, right? So we're talking about future potential. Where are you on ideas like, oh, the government's got to come in and give everybody UBI or universal basic income or something like that?
So I'm not a big fan of UBI. I think that it's a pretty broad, probably highly expensive policy. And there's a saying that I think is kind of apt here, which is a tolerable UBI would be unaffordable. An affordable UBI would be not tolerable. And I think that is kind of the point, right? If you are using a UBI as a supplement for pretty much the entire existing welfare state, that's not, in most versions I've seen of the way UBIs have been proposed, that's not exactly at all a workable way of doing economic adjustment. If you try to run a UBI in addition to the existing welfare state, well, it's not necessarily the most efficient program, and there are some legitimate questions about how expensive it would be to roll out something like that. Now, the good news is I actually think there are some quite good policies in the US that really just need to be expanded. The earned income tax credit being one example of that. I think a negative income tax in a vehicle that is more effective than a UBI essentially achieves what a UBI aims to achieve, which is just ensuring some basic standard of living across the board. I think that there's also a role for targeted workforce adjustment. So having a more dynamic economy where there are, let's say, employer-led retraining opportunities. There's industrial investment by the government in regions that may be getting left behind. That's, I think, an important element too, not just for those communities, but for the economy as a whole. I mean, when we have high levels of geographic concentration in AI innovation, there are productivity effects that we're losing out on. And some of those might be productivity gains in agriculture or in healthcare clusters. Healthcare manufacturing is a good example of that.
A huge industry going forward, I think, that people don't think about that much.
Exactly. And I think that those are some of the responses that I would look to see.
So you're really looking at it as like, I'm not out here saying we should go try to retrain a bunch of people to be AI, to get AI jobs or something. It's like,
no, I mean, and I think people know that, right? Like we've all got people back in our hometowns who are working, been in the same job for like 30, 40 years, kind of close to retirement or something. And, we all know they're not going to be retrained to do AI overnight but they've worked very hard their whole life. They happen to be in a job where the skill set that occupation requires is increasingly not in demand. But I don't think that they should be punished in terms of just having a poor livelihood for the rest of their life because of that change.
You're kind of looking at a industrial policy combined with some, hey, maybe we get some like workforce policy where we're partnering with companies on apprenticeships, jobs trainings that they're doing, and then some basic, however you call it, like using an earned income tax credit or something else to do income supplementation.
Yeah, and I think there is a role here for government to help direct where we should be creating jobs, right? If more resources in our hospitals is an important thing for us to do, there are ways that the government can subsidize that. Same thing with elder care and childcare and teachers. And that's to say nothing of the fact that there are shortages in many legacy industries. Manufacturing is a good example, where there are shortages of workers in certain good middle wage jobs that we can't fill just because there is a lagging effect of people actually being able to learn those necessary skills to perform that work. So there is, I think, a place for government to help direct folks to the places where their work is most useful.
So then I guess the obvious objection would be it's going to cost too much, right? You're talking about massive government funding programs and we're already trillions in debt and getting worse every day. So how are economists are people looking at this, thinking about that? Plus we have, obviously a huge generation retiring or about to hit the entitlement program. It's pretty hard at the same time.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that this would be an unaffordable program. I think that this is also a program that's deeply intertwined with growing American productivity and growth in general. I mean, and that's ultimately how I think about it, right? If you're going into debt or, increasing government spending, but it's intertwined with increasing economic growth, I don't really view that as an issue. I don't think that there's any reason to be worried about that. We've done it before. We can do it again. And we had some of the best years of this country in terms of how dynamic the economy was immediately following those kinds of government interventions.
AI, Government and the Future is brought to you by Corner Alliance. To find out more about Corner Alliance and how we work with government to create results, visit our website at corneralliance.com. And then make sure to search for AI Government Future in Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. And click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Corner Alliance, thanks for listening.